mobile phone is much more than just a new phone. It's actually contributing to the arrival of a new kind of man equipped with this like mobile machine wherever they go, and which is creating a new ways of human interaction, new capacity of human communication. So I try to figure out this new human with the term of Homo Telephonicus,
At first, when I started studying mobile communication, there was no such a thing as mobile communication. I mean, there were like few people looking at the social impacts of cell phones and social life.
I believe my dissertation was the first one on the topic, so far from a field, just a few kind of what felt like renegade individuals, but all kind of moving in similar directions, actually. And I think that's where the seeds of the field started, was two things. Number one was a shared interest in our questions, but number two was a desire for community.
I remember I read a focus group interview about mobile communication, and I was just really struck with the way that people talk about how it had changed things in their lives. Instead of calling to a place, you were calling to an individual. So the individualization of communication, and that changed a whole lot of things about the way people interact.
You are wrong, because this will be the killer application, and because women and adolescents will use it very, very much. It was immediately personal, very clearly became a personal device through which women were establishing a new form of autonomy in communication, personal autonomy in communication, as well as adolescents did.
And when I came back in 1997, one of the first things which really was surprising and also even annoying was seeing everybody bringing a little pager. By then, Koreans called it pp, mimicking the sound of the little device.
My employer, Hewlett Packard, actually required me to have what was called a bag phone, which was this like briefcase bag kind of thing. I only got in trouble when my monthly cell phone bill cost more than $1,000.
Nicest new aspects were logos and polyphonic ringtones. And I couldn't really imagine doing much research about that. But then my supervisor said, well, I see the limitations, but look at it more as an innovation, and look at how it has already evolved since the 90s and the possibilities how it may evolve over the next years.
I found people whose small businesses were being transformed because their teenage son had figured out how to rework their customer service using simple feature phones. I found rickshaw drivers who had become drug dealers because of the connectivity they had. I saw businesses being changed. I saw people's lives being changed.
I mean, literally in the kind of year where we were doing research, people went from no phone to mobile phone. They went, they skipped over landlines. They skipped over all of that.
I brought myself to the very first, as I remember, international workshop on mobile communication initiated by James Katz, 1999, December, Rutgers. After spending a few days at the workshop, I found, I was no longer the same person. I was really drawn into that small group of research At the end of the workshop, I thought it's not a good idea to say goodbye and, scatter. So I initiated a continuous call. Hey, we cannot stop here. We should keep going, and suggested that I might organize a successive occasion in Korea, if not next year, but sooner. And I think the idea was immediately picked up by Jim again. Hey, maybe you're right, let's see what we can do from here. At the beginning, it was not meant to be a annual, rejoinder, but it became. And, 2 years later, I was organizing a pre-conference of ICA.
And back home, a few weeks later, I was actually stuck in traffic jam in the morning, and I was bored, and I started thinking, why not start a journal? We had no clue how you start a journal, nothing. We were just like, yeah, let's do it. Sounds nice.
It was Veronika Karnowski who had the idea during a traffic jam, and then she called me and said I had this idea while I was in the car stuck, and what do you think about that, and would you want to do that?
It wasn't until, I would say, really 2007 when the iPhone came out that the US became more of a dominant leader.
Not just because of the technology, but because everybody in the world agreed to go along with this shift and to use the technology in some coherent ways that we can study.
I've had this debate with Rich Ling because I say that I think that Docomo was the first smartphone, but he disagrees. So I'm just putting it out there as a controversial point.
And I would say it feels to me like around 2013 when the journal, Mobile Media and Communication, launched. That's when I started really feeling like we kind of had a field.
We had our first meeting together in Puerto Rico to create what was then the interest group, and they needed to have an executive. And people sort of looked around, and James Katz put his hand up and said, I nominate Colin Egger to be vice chair. And before anybody could say, who's Colin Egger, I accepted and was elected.
Before mobile phones, before you could talk person to person, and you wanted to meet up with somebody, you had to agree on a time and a place. And if either one of those bits of information was off, then the meeting didn't work.
Then all of a sudden people were talking on their phones and speaking about incredibly intimate things amongst like hundreds of people. And I was like, how on earth is this happening?
At that time, there was a lot of concern that mobile phones might be decreasing people's connections to others, particularly people who are outside of their inner circles. Because at that time, a lot of people, particularly in developed countries or economically prosperous countries, were using mobile phones mostly to call their close friends and family. I think my contribution has been to try and provide a more nuanced view of the social impact of mobile phones and to really try and show that it depends a lot on the people that we're looking at, the populations that we're looking at.
And actually, Rich Ling wrote another great book where he talked about the mobile phone as a social fact, which social fact is from the French sociologist Durkheim.
And it's not like it's nice to have a phone, but it's sort of like you can't live day to day if you don't have a phone, because your friends won't know where you are. You can't pay for the bus ticket. You can't pay for the thing in the restaurant and so on.
I tried to do that one day, like I forgot my phone. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm a mobile phone researcher. What a great day. And so I got to work and I couldn't log onto my computer because of two-factor authentication, right? So.
Thinking about our social lives, especially our culturally specific social lives, how we coordinate those lives with mobile technologies, alongside knowing where we are with each other, creating, this concept that I use in mobile interface theory of social proprioception, of knowing where each other are in space, and it creating our own sense of self that's really dynamic and different than it might have been in previous media, the way that we can in real time locate each other and use that as useful information to understand our own identities and our own sense of self in the spaces that we move through.
I was a visiting scholar at UCLA working under Professor Victoria Vesna at the Design Media Arts Department. And once we were talking about my research, and I was saying that I was trying to design virtual worlds in cyberspace, and she said, don't you think cyberspace is kind of a word from the 90s? Because right now, when we are all carrying these devices and she holds her phone, that we actually can carry the internet with us. This idea of getting outside of our physical space to go to another space doesn't exist anymore because the internet's out in the world with us. And then I was thinking about that sentence, and that actually changed my whole trajectory.
Time lag becomes communication itself. It becomes meaningful, it becomes something we interpret. And I trace that across history from the very first mobile technologies that humans created with Aboriginal message sticks in Australia, all the way up through modern messaging platforms.
So what is mobile communication? Mobile communication is people basically moving themselves around and re-experiencing space through movement.
Observed that women were very in the front line in the use of the telephone, fixed telephone. This didn't fit with the stereotype that women are always backward in respect to technology.
Korea has quite traditional gender tropes, and the mobile phone was allowing women to play with those tropes in ways that they wouldn't have normally been able to in mainstream media. And my colleague Katie Krumsky has written about this in terms of the mobile phone as pepper spray, as a metaphoric pepper spray, because we use the mobile phone as a safety device. Like if we're in a scary spot, we might pretend to talk on the phone or something like that.
In my book, I interviewed workers who work shifts, and they're doing physical labor during their shifts. They can't take their mobile phone with them. The control that we have over using and setting boundaries is also a privilege. And it's not the kind of privilege that all types of workers get and are afforded in their jobs that they do.
Average length of a mobile phone call in Jamaica, and this is in like 2004, was 19 seconds. It's much more about building the network, and the network in and of itself being something of value.
There was always like a line out the door at the mobile phone shop, because in 2000, people were getting the very first phone in their life. And I just was so excited to be watching this and then having the opportunity to interview people and document what it meant to get the first phone in your life. People are not abstractions. People are not data points. People are people, and you need to listen and center them in our theorization.
For me, I started my work in this field so optimistic about the potential of mobile devices, and I would say now that I'm seeing the impact of the attention economy on the design of every platform for our mobile devices, I'm very concerned. Our attention is perhaps the most important resource we have. We live in an information abundant world. We're surrounded by information. We swim in it. So the real problem is, what do we pay attention to? The default network of the brain that only activates when you're bored and you're daydreaming, you're kind of just not doing anything in particular. We never sit there and do nothing in particular. We always have our mobile devices out. They're using the mobile phone as the answer to the mobile phone. They're designing things for our devices to help us manage our devices. And I'm not sure, to use Audre Lorde's term, I'm not sure that we can dismantle the master's house with the master's tools.
What becomes interesting is, from a privacy perspective, when or how that data is used without me knowing, without me consenting, without me fully understanding where else that data is going and how it is then being used. I think these tech companies have gotten a big pass from a policy perspective, from a regulatory perspective, because they haven't had the same kinds of public good responsibilities that broadcast has traditionally had.
It looks a bit more like telecommunications monopolies, where they're really trying to come up with alternatives to what they call data colonization, the new colonialism of big technologies.
Social media have colonized a lot of this dimension in a very perturbing way. They should pay us because we work for them. They make a lot of money on us.
When a hammer functions well, it kind of blends in with your body. It becomes an extension of your body and your agency, and you're focused mostly on what it can do for you. It's when the hammer breaks that you begin to notice it. And infrastructure is meant to disappear, but if you can bring it into a lens of visibility, it becomes a useful analytic for understanding how this all functions and really how we as people form our sense of self and our sense of community.
Basically, the infrastructure of a country is owned by a private entity, a private corporation, with some regulation from a kind of government and that sort of thing.
Everything that happens beyond that moment is physical, hardwired infrastructure. There's nothing mobile about it. It is all hardwired into the geography around us.
What people forget is that AI is not something separated by the computer, the mobile. It was born inside the digital experience, inside the digital devices.
Human-machine communication is about humans and machines making sense together. And I think making sense is not an affordance.
But she said, I don't understand this version of AI. Like the generative AI is like the horse that's bolted.
Keeping critique central and in the frame is now the only way in which I can understand AI.
The way that generative AI is really starting to colonize the digital legacy space. I mean, we've all seen those kind of Black Mirror episodes, but it's kind of now the Black Mirror has become the lived experience.
And then now, we're facing a new revolution with the AI revolution.
With generative AI too, there's this possible development of AI being woven into social interactions via mobile devices. So for example, I can imagine that if you're talking to someone and you forgot their name, you might be able to see their name.
I hope that while the division will probably maintain its boundary work, it will remain inclusive. So I really hope it will never have hard boundaries, but it will remain inclusive to technological change, to changes in how people use and in changes how media is governed.
But I think we need to make an effort to include people whose primary languages are not English into this discussion, because a lot of times the scholarly conversations get really skewed to, the hashtag first world problems.
We need to make sure that when we're talking about our research, anyone can understand why what we do is valuable, what we're learning through doing this, and how it can help society.
What are the important things about them? How can we understand them? And what are the ways in which we could leverage them for a better social future?
This talk is actually, in a way, renewing my interest in mobile communication after a while. So for sure, I'll be attending the mobile division, mobile communication division in my next participation in ICA.
I'm always excited to kind of say that we are observing and participating in an ongoing negotiation about what type of world we want to live in.
It also gives us access to our good friends and, very, very direct interactions. Just before I started talking to you, I got a message from my daughter showing with a photo of my grandson, which is, just very, very nice thing, because that adds a layer of intimacy, or it's just another chance for me to see a photo of him doing fun stuff, which is sort of the web of social interaction that we tie. So on the one hand, I see some scary stuff associated with mobile communication. At the same time, I see some good stuff associated with it.